In 1987, just before my 15th birthday, something strange and wonderful happened to me here at the Duke of York Cinema in Brighton. It was a David Lynch double bill of his then newly released Blue Velvet and the one and only Eraserhead. Watching this darkly absurd post-industrial masterpiece in the dead of night was a uniquely intense experience, after which I was never quite the same. This was my introduction to the world of midnight movies, a glorious subculture of extraordinary films, devoted fans, and some very bleary-eyed early mornings.
In the 70s, midnight movies seemed to really take off when in cities, major cities in America, people were looking for alternatives to nightlife. It really became this area where people could really discover new talents and see things that they wouldn't even imagine or wouldn't want to imagine. Underground, experimental films. Night of the Living Dead, John Waters' Pink Flamingos.
Freaks, Eraserhead. These kind of movies had really found their niche, showing after regular hours. This was partly because there was no perceived sort of decent daytime mainstream audience. And what happened was that the films built up a cult following, a real word-of-mouth following.
I think what really made it an experience was the communality of going to a midnight movie, that there were so many people there, you know, and whether they were these crazy guys who had like Dirty Harry pompadours and long coats, or whether they were like homeless people who managed to get into the theatre for the night, you know, I mean, but we were all there in this joint endeavour, as it were.
The first true midnight movie was probably the majestically surreal western El Topo. It premiered at midnight in 1970. It became a phenomenon with no advertising, playing to sold-out audiences every night for months to come.
It's an art western, and art westerns are never very successful in terms of box office because they're too specialised. But I think there was the commercial elements of El Topo which made it more successful. It's just funny. The sort of the lesbian cowboy stuff and the weirdness of it all. You know, we grew up in a fairly straight-laced society, you know, and we're constantly being invigilated by the British Board of Film Censors. And so I think that El Topo was just a wonderful kind of release from that sort of environment.
The heyday for the midnight movie in America was the 70s, but in Britain it was the 80s, and its spiritual home was the Scala Cinema in London's King's Cross, occasionally known as the Sodom Odeon.
Scala was fantastic because it was built as a 1,500-seat Victorian picture palace. You find people wrapped up in blankets and coats, shivering with cold, but also like a lot of spirit in the cinema. People laughing along to the same thing, people shrieking at the same moments, people singing, because we quite often did musical, and it showed really wide range of world cinema, although it, by the end, really developed a very strong reputation as being the home of Russ Meyer, Thundercrack, Kathy Flesh, and the much more extreme types of cult movies. The Evil Deads were made for fantastic all-night viewing. There's so much genuine horror, and the cinema was very dark and atmospheric, and there's kind of like a sense of being remote and isolated and lost in some kind of wood that worked with very kind of alternately bleak and grandiose type settings, and that's what we had. It was really as home entertainment in the early 90s got stronger and cheaper and more popular that all of us rep houses noticed audiences dropping off. The golden age of the all-night movie was long since over.
But now the midnight movie looks to be making a comeback, with cinemas like the Curzon Soho in London holding midnight screenings of cult classics as a new generation of British cinema-goers yearn for the pleasures of the late shift.
I think when we started out there was always a fear that people just wouldn't turn up at midnight. But we're wrong, like our audiences get so involved, you know, they dress up all the time, and people keep on coming back month after month.
Obviously the people that come here, they're not just sort of walking into the cinema in the middle of the day, something to do. It's like they've made the effort, they've got here, they've got dressed up, they've got into the whole thing, and that atmosphere obviously is going to make it so much more fun.
I think it's returning cinema to its original roots, which is much more related to circus, much more sociable, much more communal. And it's really exciting. There's a big rise in this sort of thing.
It's really late at night, which is a bit of a pain, but you get to see movies like this, which have been released years ago, and you get them on the big screen again.
Tonight we're just about to show Battle Royale to 250 screaming, rabid audience members. It's a Japanese cult classic that came out back in 2000. This is blood, guts, mayhem. This is pretty amazing, pretty spectacular. This is an experience you just can't get at home. You need to see these films on the big screen, and you need to see them with an audience of like-minded people, and that is Midnight Movies.
The 70s are a long way behind us, but the intensity of the midnight movie experience lives on. Just like the desire for something a little different from a night out at the pictures. And its revival is proof that here and there, it remains forever midnight.